Hello and welcome to another pen video from me, Penultimate Dave. So here I have another inks comparison video, and this is green inks comparison number 4. So I think with that, let's go and swab up some of these inks. So I get a lot of questions on how I do these ink videos. So I decided I would add this to the front of each of the ink videos. I put links in the description, but I know some of you watch this on TVs or mobile devices, so you don't get to see this. So first off, the paper is the number one question I get asked. What paper do I use for these ink comparison videos? So this is the original Tomoe River. This is 52 GSM, and it is the white, not the cream, the white. Where possible, I try to go for the white because the cream can actually change the color of the ink just a little bit. So this is Tomoe River 52 GSM in the white. A lot of people get confused as well because I have what looks to be a grid on this page, and it's actually an Oxford Optik pad. These are the pads that I actually use when I'm writing my writing samples for pen reviews or in my currently ink. So they have these little squares up here. I just use that because it's a good guide for me when I put this very thin sheet of Tomoe River over. I can actually see squares, so it helps me write a little bit sort of straight on the page. Not always, but sometimes it does. The other thing that I also have is I have a bottle of water, plain water, and I dip my nib in here. So for consistency, I use the same fountain pen, or I guess it's not a fountain pen, it's using a fountain pen nib though. This is a 3D printed pen from William Shakour in the UK. So he prints this material 3D, and it has a number 8 size Bock nib which I can unscrew, and you can see there. So it is just a dip pen holder for a number 8 size Bock nib, and the idea is I want to have consistency with the writing sample. So I use this, I dip it in the ink, I write, and then I will dip it in here, and I will rinse the nib off several times, and I will dry it, and then at that point I will then go on to do the next ink swatch and the next writing sample. So there you have it. That's how I do my ink swatches. So I just wanted to show you that here. Now on to the ink comparison video. The first ink here is Monteverde, and this is Keylime Pie, and this is part of the Sweet Life edition of ink. So I think let's do an ink swatch, and you can see here that this is a super bright color of green. We'll do a second pass over the top half of this ink swatch, and this is, I get a lot of questions, it's to denote the difference between what a wet versus a dry writing nib would look like, but it will also show the difference as well in terms of shading in the pooled ink areas. So this is Monteverde, and it is Keylime Pie. And this, I have to say, is a favourite green of mine. I do like how bright and vibrant this green is. So it'll be interesting to see how that ink dries on the page. The next ink is Diamine, and this is Spring Green. So again, we'll do an ink swatch here. And again, this is a very light green colour, but it's a slightly different green. It's not as neon or punchy as the Monteverde Keylime Pie. So we'll do a slightly more saturated area on the top here to show the difference between a wet versus a dry writing nib. So this is Diamine, and it is Spring Green. But that is quite a nice green as well. a little bit more of a grassy spring green colour. The next ink is Diamine Meadow. So we'll do an ink swatch. And this is a very meadowy colour grass ink. And it has quite a bit of shading, I find. So we'll do a little bit of a second pass here on the top, show the difference between a wet versus a dry writing nib. So this is Diamine, and it is Meadow. The next ink is Diamine, and it's Apple Glory. So we'll do an ink swatch here, and this I find is a little bit similar to Diamine Meadow, although this tends to be more, as in what it suggests, apple. So it's almost like a beautiful apple green colour. So I've done a second pass on the top half here, show the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. And this is Diamine, and it's Apple Glory. But very much like a very nice ripe green apple. The next ink here is Diamine, and it's Ultra Green. So we'll do an ink swatch. And again, I would say that this is very similar to Apple Glory. I'd say maybe it's just a smidgen darker. So we'll do a second pass over the top half here, show the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. And this is Diamine, and it's Ultra Green. And I'd have to say that this is an ink that I've not written with or used before. It's a new ink, but I have to say it's quite a nice looking green ink so far. And then the final ink here is Montblanc Irish Green. So we'll do an ink swatch. And I do find that this is a darker green ink, very much of an Irish green, or I'd almost say maybe a British racing green. It's not that far off it, I would say. So we'll do the second pass there, just so that you can see the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. And this is Montblanc, and it's Irish Green. But that also is quite a nice green if you're into mid to darker greens. So I think let's take a look at these inks now that they have dried some more. So the first ink I have here is Monteverde, and it's Keylime Pie, and it's part of the Sweet Life version of, or edition of, inks. It's a limited edition set of inks from Monteverde. Now this is a super bright neon green, and it doesn't make any apology for that either. Now you can definitely see the difference between a wet versus a dry writing nib. There's also quite a lot of shading going on there. And if I show you here, is there any sheening going on? No, there isn't, but there is a lot of shading. And honestly, I wouldn't expect sheening from a green ink, or at least a light green or mid-green ink. The next ink here is Diamine Spring Green, and you can again see the difference, a huge difference between the wet versus a dry writing nib. And when I say wet, it could just be a broader nib, and dry could just be a narrower nib. But this is the difference you're going to see. This is a wet writing nib, so that corresponds to the wetness. In terms of shading, there is a bit of shading going on there, not as much as Monteverde Keylime Pie. And if we take a look here, you can see the green in a little bit more detail with the writing sample. Again, no sheen there because it is a lighter green ink. The next ink here is Diamine Meadow, and you can definitely see the difference between a wet versus a dry writing nib. the writing sample is a wet writing nib. There is a lot of shading going on there in that pooled area of wetness of the ink. Now, again, if I show you here on camera, there isn't any sheening properties there on that ink, but it does do a lot of shading. So for me, that typically, if you want a shading ink, that is an ink that will shade nicely. The next ink here is Diamine Apple Glory, and I always, for some reason, think of it as a grassy green, but it really is a ripe apple off of an apple tree or an apple orchard. It's a beautiful green. It's a bright, it's a punchy green, but not overstatedly bright as in Monteverde Keylime Pie. You can see the difference between a wet and a dry writing nib. There is quite a bit of shading going on, and you can kind of see that in the writing sample as well. If I show you the ink close up, you're not going to see any sheen there because it is just a regular green, but you can hopefully see some of the shading going on there and also in that writing sample. The next ink is Diamine Ultra Green, and again you can see a huge difference between the wet and a dry writing nib. There is quite a lot of shading going on, certainly around the pooled areas. So if you've got a wet writing nib, you're going to see more shading with this ink. In terms of the sheen, is there any sheen? There isn't really. I want to say it's kind of wanting to sheen around the edges here, but I don't know, maybe can you see that on camera there? It's not what I would honestly call sheen. And then the last ink we have here is Montblanc Irish Green. So if you like a sort of darker, mid to darker green, then this is possibly the colour for you. Also a little bit of a British racing green, possibly. You can see a huge difference between the wet and the dry writing nib there. There is a bit of shading going on with Montblanc Irish Green, although I would say that you're probably not going to see a huge amount of shading. I certainly don't see much shading in the writing sample. I think if we show you close up here, you'll see there that there is some shading in the top of that ink pass there, but again, it's not a huge amount of shading. There's no sheen there either. So again, it's not a sheening ink. So there you have it. That's my green inks comparison number 4 video. If you like any of these green inks, then do let me know in the comments below. Likewise, if you have any other green inks that are a favourite green of yours, or that are very similar to these, or you want to see compared, do let me know in the comments below. So that's my green inks comparison number 4 video. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next pen video. Bye bye.